Here's an overview of what we're going to cover. First, we're going to assume that at this point you've already shown the property, talked with the client about that property. And for anybody who's not on my team who might be watching this on YouTube, we primarily deal with multifamily residential buyers, whether they are full investors doing large properties or owner occupants buying smaller properties. So you're going to collect from your client details about how they would like to make the offer. And then you're going to do a little homework. So you're going to go from there, and you'll let your client know. You're going to do some research, and then you'll get back with them with your recommendations about how they make the most successful offer. You'll review the listing, and you'll download all of the supplements. If you haven't already sent your supplements to your buyer, this would be the time to do that and have them review it. You'll also pull comps. I'll give you directions on that. And then when you have all that information together, you'll contact the listing agent and start off hopefully what will be a great relationship, ask them some questions, and then finally touch base with your buyer with your recommendations about what's the most successful offer that you think they could make. Then finally, you'll make sure that you have your disclosures and buyer's agencies handy, and you'll put them into your contract package. Now, on this bullet point about contract packages, we'll go over a very high level, but there will be 2 or 3 more videos about how to actually fill out contracts that will be offered. Once you have your contract package appropriate for your offer completely filled out, you'll present that offer. Once it's signed, right? You'll present that offer to the listing agent. There'll be a routine for that. You may go through and likely to go through counter offers. And once you've come through counter offers and actually have an agreed contract, then we'll have a routine for you on how to kick off your contract in a very successful manner. So here's the details. So when we go to collect offer details, here's the things you want to know from your buyer. You're going to ask them their desired offer price. They're going to give you something, and you're going to definitely, take that into consideration and let them know that once you do one level of communication research, you will come back to them with your recommendation. It may be the same, and it might be just that you actually have another recommendation about how to successfully present your offer. Then also you'll find out how they are feeling on earnest money. I would recommend that you're always going to do 1% or more depending on exactly what the property is. But you should discuss that with your buyers to let them know that expectation. They want to present a strong offer. Doing less than 1% is not going to present them as being serious or potentially of enough funds to close with the offer. The third thing you're going to do is, if you don't, you should already have it, but make sure that you have either a proof of cash funds or the buyer's pre-approval letter. You'll also discuss with them closing costs. Are they prepared to pay the closing costs themselves? In our current market climate, I would strongly recommend that they pay their own closing costs. But if they're needing to they don't have the cash and they need seller cash, then they need to be prepared to accommodate for the amount of closing costs that they are asking for in the purchase price. And we'll go about talking about more details with that. But basically, if it's a $100,000 offer, but they want $3,000 worth of closing costs, my recommendation is that they offer $103,000 to remain competitive, because we are still very much in a seller's market. So they can include closing costs, but they have to accommodate for that in their purchase price. Then the next thing we have to talk about is the contingency details. So depending on the type of contract package, you are going to potentially have special agreements, inclusions, and exclusions. You'll also have, and we'll go through this in the specific contract classes, you will have potential of riders, an appraisal rider. If it's a rental property, which it likely is, a rental property rider, a special sale contract rider, inspection contract rider, I apologize. If it is a special sale contract, you use a special sale inspection rider. If it's a residential contract, you already have your inspection contingencies included within that contract. You would want to ask your buyers about any calendar conflicts they might have within the next 30 to 45 days. So if they're going to be traveling or not have internet access, they can close remotely, but they're going to have internet access or the ability to go to a notary and have items emailed to them, printed, signed, notarized, and then overnighted back. Otherwise, they'll have to be in St. Louis or online with an online notary with online sufficient for videos in order to conduct a closing during those 30 to 45 days. The time to close depends on the distinctions of your offer. Cash offers are usually 15 days. Most conventional loans are 30 days. And FHA or VA, 45 days. If you happen to be commercial, those are usually 60 days. You also, while you're doing this, you want to try to pin down a desired closing date that accommodates your manner of financing, as I just discussed. And then finally, you're going to ensure that they have reviewed their seller disclosure and lead-based paint disclosure. So for your, now moving down into the details of each one, looking at your listing and supplement review, you should have, you may not read every detail when you're going to show 5 properties until you know that somebody has a decision. So the first thing you want to do when you know somebody's getting serious is read that listing, read the agent notes, download the supplements, read them yourself, make sure you've already given a copy to your buyer, and then look at the listing history. In the listing history, you're going to find out when was the last time this was on market. You're going to be able to find out if it was bought on market, what did the seller buy it for, how long ago was it. You may be able to find more things, but you just want to have a full education on this property as you're going forward. So in your agent notes, you definitely want to look for any sort of offer deadlines, expected response times. So agents will say things like offers should be submitted by Monday at 5 p.m. with a response time no earlier than Tuesday at 5 p.m. or something like that. So you want to look for that. You want to put a good offer together that reflects that you have looked at all the details that have been provided to you and present yourself as a professional so that you will be taken seriously and your offer will be considered. I guarantee you the absence of looking at details and going forward with all of your details together can cost you reputation and can cost your buyer the offer if they believe that you are new or you are unorganized or you do not know what you're doing. So you definitely want to come with your A game when you start talking to your listing agent. Before you do that, you want to do your comp listings and print out. You're going to want to send comp listings, but look at them yourself, meaning look at the pictures, look at all the details. And you're also going to want to use a report, which is a CMA when you're printing reports from Maris. These are the key items, not maybe all the items, but you're going to be looking at, first, you're going to look at your property that you're going to make an offer on, and then you're going to look at all of the potential comparable properties. That's what comp stands for. So those mean ideally properties in the same neighborhood with a similar amount of square feet, maybe plus or minus 200 to 300, or bigger properties, maybe a little bit more, with the same number of beds and baths, with the same similar features and condition, meaning has it been updated or not? Does it have a garage or not? When we're talking about multifamily, just to kind of backtrack for a moment, square feet and beds and baths are most important in terms of the overall size of the building or maybe the typical size of the units. And then the beds and baths, most important when if a building has 2 bedrooms or more per apartment. These are kind of a different category than a 1-bedroom apartment scenario, so they're more valuable. So you want to look through those things. You want to know the date of the last sale, and you want to know the days on market. So that's going to be expressed to you as the DOM, days on market, or CDOM, which is cumulative days on market. So for example, if I had something on market last 2-3 months ago, and then I put it on a hold for a couple months while I was doing some work, and then I put it back on the market. I might go on market as a day 0 today, but I might have been on market within the last 90 days for 80 of those days. So you want to look at all of these numbers and kind of understand the history of this listing. Is it brand new to market? Has it had an offer and then fell out of contract? All of these things are really important when you're talking about how to present an offer, is to know if there were other offers. If there were other offers, there might be an inspection that you could look at that will help you put a stronger offer together going forward with the knowledge of the condition of the building. And the other thing that you want to look at is, who do you believe is the buyer audience, right? So depending on the neighborhood, on the price point, on the type of units, if there is a unit available for immediate move in, you may be looking at an owner occupier, or you may be looking at investors only. If it's a fully occupied building with no ability to see it prior to making a contract, or that a building that won't accept FHA or VA buyers, pretty much they're not prepared to address owner occupants or the potential requirements on seller that may be implied, such as repairs, right? Is this an as-is building, or has seller not mentioned as is? That means maybe they are willing, maybe they don't want to do repairs, but they're still not negating the fact that they might have to do repairs. So each of these tells you a little bit about the audience that you're going to be dealing with. Be sure, if you have questions about this, to ask me about those different audiences and what we can pull from a listing review that might help us understand the audiences better. So then the next thing you're going to do when you have all of your information there in your head, you kind of have your opinion. If you're on my team and you're new, please call and talk to me first. Let me know your findings. I'll help you kind of form this up. And then you want to know from the listing agent a lot of things, right? Like, I might start with an opening question, like, what can you tell me about this building? And they're going to tell you everything they can, right? Some things they may not be able to tell you at all, right? Definitely you want to know if they already have offers received, or if they've heard from other agents that maybe they're going to write an offer. This just tells you an indicator of how much competition is out there. You don't have to get too hung up about whether they actually have offers or not. Just, if they have one, it's one thing. If they have like 5 people saying they might put an offer in, it's a pretty good idea that you're going to have some competition. So I tend to ask also if the agent has any advice for me on key items that might be most important to the seller. For example, they really focused on the dollars, or maybe they're living in the property and the closing date is important to them, or flexibility with the closing date. Or maybe there are certain personal property that they want to take, but they're willing to leave others. There could be various things that could make or break an ideal offer to a seller. So the more you know, even though sometimes, there may not be anything, it may just be a straight sell, it might be an investor selling and there's nothing important, they just want money, right? But there could be anything going on there. So then also the next bullet point, if your buyers have had any questions that you've collected, then this is the time to ask those questions, something that they couldn't find on the seller's disclosure or on the listing or see it in person. Let's ask those questions. Just keep a note that just because a listing agent told you something on the telephone, that's not a binding statement. So anything that's super important that comes out in that conversation, you'll want to make sure to write your contract to confirm that is part of the contract, if it is something that needs to be and absolutely completed when we're done. And then usually I end up with, I thank the agent. Thank you. I'm hopefully looking forward to doing a contract with you again, or for the first time, if that's the case. And I tend to express that, I really try to make sure that all my deals are very simple, straightforward, and that I have smooth contracts. And so, if we're going to work together, I just tell that agent, that's how I try to operate. I tell them I try to operate as transparently as possible, and that I hope that we, can look forward to a good relationship and working good together as a couple of team members, cooperating agents. That's what we call it. So then finally, you're going to do a buyer touch base. After you've got this information, you are going to provide those comps and market analysis to your buyers, any answers to the questions, finalize the offer approach. So this means this is where you have the tough conversation and you just say, hey, look, I've looked at the comps. I've sent you those and the market analysis. We can go over together if you want to go over, but my recommendation is this. There's XYZ competition, and the offer that you started with, I don't think is going to result in you having received this contract. You may have to educate them about the market. If it's right now, at least right now, it's still a seller's market, even though everybody thinks that interest rates are going up and prices should be going down. That absolutely, as of September 20th, 2022, is not the case. We're having still handfuls of offers on a property with inspection periods and appraisals waived. So to the degree that buyers can waive those things, that's great. But when they are in the situation where they cannot do that, then really we have to coach them that the one thing they have to negotiate with is their price point. And so we'll talk about how to execute that in another video. And then I would let them know this. I'm going to send you two different packets, right? I'm going to send you first some signatures that we need before the offer. Those are going to be our broker disclosure and a buyer's agency contract. And we'll talk about those specific contracts before, but they are things that we should have actually signed before we go under contract on a property. So the first thing I would do after this conversation is to go do your broker disclosure and buyer's agency. Send those off to your buyer and then to your broker to get signed, and then you're going to file them until you have a fully executed offer. Later, and I'll repeat this multiple times, when you have a fully executed offer, these broker disclosures and buyer's agency need to be handed over into the transaction or to your transaction manager. If you're on my team, you're using a transaction manager, and so they will need a copy of all of these documents in order to have compliance, and they need to be signed and dated prior to the offer. Next thing, disclosures and buyer's agency. So I think I already said this and I have an extra slide here, right? So I'm not going to go through it again. I'll just let you look at that slide for a minute, but same points. Finally, the contract packages. We're typically going to go through three different types of two different types of contract packages with a few options, and then there are some things that happen for all of our contracts, right? So on the left-hand side, apartment buildings, and I'm also going to say as-is sales. So apartment buildings, definitely those with 5 units or above, or any as-is sale, whether that's a single family, a 2-family, or a 4-family. These require a special sale contract 100% of the time. Oh, let's say 99% of the time, right? Or any listing that says that in its agent notes or in its marketing remarks that the seller is expecting an as-is sale, or seller is not willing to do any repairs or inspections. These are all going to be written in the blue box, right? So they're going to use a special sale contract. If you are writing an inspection period, if your user is expecting a inspection period contingency where they can negotiate or leave the contract, you have to attach a special sale inspection rider. And if your user wants an appraisal, and I say user by buyer, if your buyer wants an appraisal, or if your buyer is using a loan, you have to attach an appraisal rider. And if this is a rental property that has tenants inside, right, then you need a rental property rider. Again, we'll go through the details in each of these docs later in a different video. Then finally, secondly, for things that are not as is, especially when somebody is an owner occupant, They're going to move into a building, whether it's a single family or a multifamily. It really can only be 1, 2, 3, or 4 units. You will use a residential sale contract. The residential sale contract assumes a lot of things like home ownership, right? It assumes that the buyer is, or the seller is going to have that property move in ready and meeting all of the occupancy certificates and inspections, etc., prior to that time, and that a seller is willing to work with any requirements from the buyer's loan process, such as appraisal requirements that can happen, or negotiating it through an inspection notification that you might need certain repairs. Now, just so that we don't have a surprise, it's still a seller's market. Sellers are very unlikely not willing to do a lot of work. And so with the exception of very major items that are complete surprises, you should set your buyers up to expect that sellers are resistant and generally not willing to do a lot of work, so that when they are running their inspections, they need to basically look for major deal breaker items where if they don't get this done, they do not want to buy the property. That is usually the roof, the HVAC, the sewer, or the electric being wholly or mostly inoperable, right? Or not able to move in and expect to live in the home on day one. Things like loose toilets, missing electric boxes that maybe aren't grounded, things that could be like a minor code violations, right? Those things are not going to be well negotiated. The ones that are truly important may come up on the seller's occupancy inspection, so the city may force them to do that, but this is not a time for buyers to look for a handyman because something isn't totally perfect, right? I would expect that buyers should be ready if they have little things that they wanted to be done all around the house, maybe to hire a handyman after closing. And that's just something that you maybe want to have them ready to go forward with. In terms of appraisal writers, there are 3 possible types that all depend on the type of financing your buyer is using, unless for some reason your buyer is using cash. So a straight appraisal writer is the same amongst all contracts unless your buyer is financed by FHA or a VA loan. Those each have their own appraisal writers. They have to be marked as a writer in the writer section, and you have to attach the either FHA or VA appraisal writer in place of the normal appraisal writer. That is a must. And then also, assuming that in our team we are buying multifamily residential property, if it is at all occupied, and it probably is because if you're on a residential sale writer, it should be inhabitable, you need a rental property writer. This was going to tell you the rents, the lease terms, the expenses, and much more about the building. So that's just something to be aware of that you need to have on your offer. Again, we'll go over that in another video. And then, as I mentioned earlier, on all contracts, you're going to have these on the far right in the green box. You're going to have a buyer's exclusive agency. You're going to have a broker disclosure and an assigned acknowledgement. And those are going to be, those 2 first things, you can do them once. And as long as they are within the period that they were signed for example, buyer's exclusive agency from today until the end of 2022. As long as you're within that window, then you don't have to get another one signed with every offer. But if you've run out of time or it's been a little bit of time, you need to get those things signed again. And then finally, you'll either have you should have a disclosure. There are some properties where a seller hasn't lived there and they won't provide a seller's disclosure. However, you are required by regulation to have a lead-based paint disclosure, and its pamphlet given it to your buyer. If you find a listing that does not have a lead-based paint disclosure to download, I would start asking the listing agent for it right away. I wouldn't fret if you don't have it when you make the offer, but you will need to get it ASAP if you get under contract, like same day at least. Sorry. And then finally, you should already have by this point the proof of cash funds or the buyer's pre-approval from their financing entity. But you're going to need to have that on every contract. There's no reason to ever submit a contract to somebody without the verification that your buyer has the means to buy this property. Next, you are going to present the offer, and then you're probably going to have some counter offers. We'll see how it goes. If it is multiple offers, you may not have any counter offers because you may just have yours accepted if it was the most attractive offer. That is the most common procedure that I am seeing these days, but I'm including counter offers because I believe we may start seeing them again in the future. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to send your completely signed contract package with all of the riders and signed disclosures to your listing agent in email. You are going to then call the agent to confirm that they received that email, and when I do call them, I'd summarize the offer. I would say something like, "Hey Jane, I just sent you over an offer. Just want to make sure that you found it in your email. Hey, and if you have a few minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of what the offer looks like. The sales price is this, the earnest money is this, I'm financed with cash or I'm financed with a FHA loan. The buyers are super pumped about your property. They're going to be easy to work with." I mean, don't say things that you don't know to be true, but I've set them up. I do everything that I can to set them up so that they know what to expect and how to plan that these transactions are going to go. So I fully expect this is going to be a very smooth process if we do get into contract, and go from there, right? Whatever you can do to convey information and be friendly and professional with your agent without sharing more information than you should be sharing on your buyer's side. If there's no answer, then definitely you want to text the agent for confirmation of receipt. And you're going to stay in this pattern until you know that they have received the offer. If it happens that somebody doesn't respond, it's crazy what listing agents don't answer their phone these days. But if you're going to keep doing that, and if you get to your acceptance deadline, if it's near and there's been no response, I would be calling and texting and figuring out what the heck is going on. If you receive a counter offer, then my recommendation, what I want to see done with paperwork, is when we write the counter offer document, and this is just a document that refers to the original contract offer by document, by paragraph, by line number, and it lists the changes. So I attach my counter offers in the beginning of a package, but include the complete package. I don't include broker disclosures and buyer's agencies and all that, but the original offer, I include the entire thing, so that they have the complete package there, and send it with signatures and initials until a contract is reached. So if there's multiple counter offers, I always put the most recent one at the very beginning. And then, kind of sequentially, by date, they will go in reverse order, followed by the full original contract. So finally, let's say you reached your contract. You've got an accepted contract. So here's what you're going to do. Remind me that I have templates for you guys on this, but you're going to email 2 emails. One is going to go to your buyer and their lender if they have one, and you're always going to copy your transaction manager, and I don't list it here, but your team leader, right? You're going to, in that email, it's going to say, "Hey, congratulations, the sellers have accepted your offer, blah, blah, blah," right? And then some key deadline points here. That you're going to send a trust funds link that is found on the MLS. It allows the agent or the buyer to submit their earnest money electronically and it to be tracked directly to the title company. So you're going to remind them of their earnest money deadline. It's most likely going to be 3 business days after the acceptance deadline. You're going to manage this, because if they say okay and then 3 days later they haven't done it, they are effectively in breach of the contract, and they could be put in an unfavorable position if things go south. So don't let them blow this date. Then you're also going to remind them of the inspection contingency guideline. They need to order it now, like they need to take the action the moment they're under contract to order their inspection and pin down a date. And you want to tell them to see if they can conduct that inspection ASAP. So if they can get it for tomorrow, great. And here's where reading your listing is important. If they've required 48 hours for access to occupied units, you need to make sure that your buyer gives at least 48 hours before they schedule a contract, so that you can arrange with the listing agent to be able to have access to all of the units if they're going to inspect all the units. Then you are going to also, it's usually going to be the same day, about 10 days, remind them of their insurance deadline and encourage them to reach out to an insurance provider. I usually provide in my messages 2 or 3 insurance resources and inspection resources that they can use. In the city of St. Louis, I would strongly recommend that any buyer has a sewer inspection, because many sewers are more than 100 years old. Many of them are breaking, and unless there's evidence that that sewer has been fully replaced, it is very common that a sewer issue is found. So we can come back to that later if you have questions, but very important there to remind your buyers of that. So then also along this email, you're going to provide a fully executed contract packet with the entire offer. Again, you are going to include the broker disclosure and buyer agency here just so that everybody has it. But the lender's going to need this so that they can get started. If you don't have the lender's information, you should have from the pre-approval. But if you do not have it, then send it to your buyer. Tell them they need to send it to their lender and ask them to copy you within 24 hours. Then the next email you're going to do is the listing agent. You're going to thank them for their partnership, and you're going to introduce them to your transaction manager. And just as a good measure, I would include the full offer packet. You don't have to include the buyer's agency or broker disclosure, but include the fully executed packet back to the listing agent, just so that everything's ready to go there. And then finally, you're going to plan to update and be updated weekly. So on our team, we have a weekly Tuesday meeting where we go over all our contracts. You're going to ensure that your buyer does not miss a deadline without action. So on one hand, your transaction manager is going to keep things on the rails for you, and they're going to do your back office work, and they're going to follow up on needs for the contract and deadlines for the contract in your weekly meeting. And while that is nice and it's a service that we pay for, it does not absolve you from your responsibility to make sure that things happen without missing a deadline. So pay attention to what you don't give the wheel totally over to your transaction manager. You still remain responsible. So you should know what those dates are. Your transaction manager should put them on your calendar, but I tend to keep them in my mind anyway, and touch base, especially in the first few days of a contract, touch base with my buyer, just see how they're doing, remind them that they need to send me a receipt when they get a receipt for the earnest money, and that they are going to need to communicate back to me when they have scheduled their inspection so that I can communicate accordingly. So there are probably a million other things that we need to do in a contract, but this should get us started. Hopefully it's not too long. Looks like I'm something